It's fair for everybody to have their concerns about the wide receiver room, but they might not be the weakest link on this Penn State football team.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football. Thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your host of the show. Wide receiver might not be the weakest link. Defensive tackle is actually pretty concerning. Penn State's 2025 schedule is by no means easy, and the tight end U debate, why Penn State is absolutely in the conversation with Iowa. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And as always, let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Be a part of the conversation. So for Penn State's defensive tackles, this is the position group that I think should have the most concern going into next season, and not the wide receivers. Now, granted, things could change with the spring transfer portal window, but after Zane Durant, there is a lot of uncertainty for this part of the position group. I know this is the defensive line overall isn't necessarily an issue because you have denied Dennis Sutton. You were able to go get a Nye White from the transfer portal. There's a lot of promise for the return of Zariah Fisher and the breakout seasons of a Max Granville, for example, or even a Jalen Harvey going into his second season as well. But defensive tackle, you don't have that same kind of conversation, unfortunately, about the current players. Now, you would like to assume that there's optimism, but I can't categorize those players the same way that I could with a defensive end. Okay, sure, Zane Durant is going to be an all-conference player. I think he could definitely live up to the potential of first-team all-conference, first-team all-Big Ten. I think maybe in the middle of a second-team all-Big Ten. And if things really go well, I mean, at one point in time, he was the highest graded defensive tackle per Pro Football Focus for the first portion of last season. So he could be All-America caliber. Now, those are lofty expectations, but Zane Durant definitely has talent and could have gone to the NFL draft this cycle, decided to return. After that, it's all uncertain for the defensive tackle room. Sure, there's Alonzo Ford, and Penn State, I think, is very lucky to retain him for another season, but Ford's recovering from an injury. And this was, based on what we gathered, a long-term injury that kept him out for the remainder of last season. Penn State certainly could have used him for that postseason run. He would have proved to be invaluable because Penn State was just constantly rotating the likes of Zane Durant, Keziah Izzard, Devon J. Thomas, and Alonzo Ford gave you that extra defensive tackle. Depth matters so much because then you get 100% from every single one of those players, especially the ones that are the most talented. But does he recover well? Is he going to be 110% right away to begin the season? What is his timeline? I'm sure we'll figure that out over the course of the spring season. Those are your two starters, and let's assume the best case scenario that Zane Durant and Alonzo Ford are your starters, your 1-2 punch at defensive tackle. After that, it's a complete unknown. You would assume that Ty Blanding and Xavier Gilliam would be the next two players on this depth chart because of the conversation that was had after Ford was lost to injury. So that's understandable, but they never really made it onto the football field when it mattered. So as much as James Franklin and some of the other teammates hyped up Gilliam and Blanding and what they were doing in practice, they never had meaningful reps on the football field. It was late in football games when the score was out of reach. They didn't really make any impact plays. But I imagine that those two would be the next men up. Caleb Artis is in this conversation as well. Redshirt Jr. still a part of the football team. Hasn't really played a lot of meaningful football at defensive tackle as well. I think Liam Andrews gets lost in this conversation. Somebody that came in with lofty expectations, a lot of potential, could have played either of offensive line, ended up settling for defensive line, now dealt with an injury his first season at Penn State as a true freshman, but took that red shirt and, added the weight. Not every single player is ready to play college football right away because they have to add college football weight. And if you're Liam Andrews, he absolutely had to go through that himself. So you get Owen Wafel in the transfer portal. That is another player from Michigan, and that's another player that's a depth rotational piece, and you don't know what kind of impact he's going to make, if any at all. When I compare and contrast to the wide receiver room, from the wide receiver room to defensive tackle, Penn State got an instant impact starter, two of them, in Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross. You can't say that about Owen Wafel and any of the defensive tackles. Again, things can change with the spring transfer portal window when the middle of April rolls around. But I'm going to temper my expectations that Penn State's going to be able to go because first, you don't know who's going to be available. You don't know if there's an impact player ready to go, somebody that can be a second string defensive tackle, maybe even compete for starting reps. Someone that can fill in for Alonzo Ford and essentially be that 2A, 2B co-star next to Zane Durant. And that costs a lot of money. Defensive tackle is one of the premium positions in the transfer portal. If you want a superstar at defensive tackle, that is going to cost close to $1 million in NIL. And I imagine that was from a season ago. Last time we talked to Brian Smith, he was very vocal about how it is expensive to go get a defensive tackle that you would normally see at the likes of Georgia because of the impact that they have. It's going to cost $750K to $1 million. That number is probably moved to $1 million to $1.25 million. So Penn State says, Pat Kraft says that they are ready to be heavy spenders in the transfer portal, but you're also having a lot of hypotheticals here. Okay, who is going to be available? What if somebody is available? And is Penn State going to be able to outspend to go get and gather interest from that prospective defensive tackle? Because they need help here. They need help. Now, I do like a player like Randy Adarica is coming in as a true freshman. He has college-ready size. And when we talk to Brian, because he knows Florida recruiting very well, again, he's the recruiting expert on the Locked On Podcast Network. For those who might not remember Brian, he hasn't been a guest on here frequently, but the last time we talked to him, a player like a Randy Adarica certainly could play sooner rather than later because he comes in at 6'3", 285 pounds. I mean, that is starting. Zane Durant, for example, Zane Durant is 6'1", 288 pounds. So Adarica already has comparable size, but would need to have the athleticism, learn the playbook. And if he can do that, it benefits him that he enrolled early. So maybe Adarica, somebody that was getting a lot of interest from schools like USC, Miami of Florida, could factor into some playing time early on. Other names like I already mentioned Liam Andrews, but a DeAndre Cook is somebody that should get some attention, kind of like Xavier Gilliam, where these players are all redshirt freshmen. They're going into their second season. And if they do things well in winter workouts, if they have a good spring football season, maybe you could see their trajectory change. But at least right now, when you compare and contrast to the wide receiver room, for example, Tysier Denmark was generating buzz already as a true freshman. He's now a redshirt freshman. But there isn't that same type of characterization for another player that's at defensive tackle. If we were hearing, and maybe we will in due time, but if Liam Andrews have received that kind of compliment, or anybody really, if it was Ty Blanding, if it was Xavier Gilliam, or Caleb Artis was starting to turn the corner as a veteran, those same types of things that we've heard about the wide receiver room are not being said about defensive tackle. So defensive tackle, this is a big deal because in the Big Ten, when you face the likes of, now I know granted Penn State isn't playing Michigan and Illinois, but Ohio State has changed to an extent where they are more of a run-first team, if you can believe that. And then you're going to face the likes of Iowa this season. And we're going to talk about the schedule and how it is by no means easy for Penn State. So you need talented defensive tackles and then defensive tackle depth because the Big Ten Conference is still physical above all else. And defensive tackle was a massive issue in that in 2021, 2022, I don't want to see Penn State return to those issues this upcoming season when they do have potential to be, yes, they are a national title contender. They are one of the top 3 teams in the country, but they definitely need to address this position group going into the spring transfer portal season and hopefully get and maximize the potential of some of these uncertain players at this time. The potential's there, but there's still uncertainty. Nothing has been proven just yet, but they're the next man up. So we'll see how things go as the spring season progresses. Penn State's 2025 schedule. Some people are saying it's easy. I couldn't believe that anybody would say that. When you're facing Oregon, Ohio State in a season, and on top of Nebraska, Iowa, this schedule is not easy. How Penn State's going to navigate it, we'll talk about it next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's episode is brought to you by Roy. Attention, Locked On Nittany Lion fans. You ever wish that you could directly support your favorite Penn State athletes and be a part of their journey? Now you can with Roy, the NIL app that puts fans in control. Before Roy, NIL deals were often handled behind closed doors, and fans like you didn't really have a clear way to directly support players that you care about. But now with Roy, you can make a real impact and feel closer to the athletes that are representing Penn State. With Roy, you get to choose the player that you want to support, player or players that you want to support. You decide how much you want to contribute, and you'll get exclusive content straight from the athletes that you are backing. If your player transfers, you will get your money back. It's a risk-free way of showing your support and making your voice heard. You can support your favorite players directly and help shape the future of Penn State sports. Download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing Penn State athletes the way that they deserve, with transparency, with trust, and a real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite players. Penn State's 2025 schedule is not easy. It is not a cakewalk. If you want to make the argument that the non-conference schedule is, by all means, because Nevada, FIU, Villanova, those aren't challenging. But the point of a non-conference schedule, to have a strong one or a challenging one, was because conference schedules didn't do enough to get you into the top four. And now that you have a 12-team playoff, 14-team playoff, I should say, now that you have an expanded Big Ten conference with schools that you would naturally play out of conference. So Oregon, UCLA, those used to be those non-conference games that you would make room for to boost your resume. And now you don't have to do that. But in doing so, with the Big Ten expansion, you now play Oregon. Yet UCLA doesn't have the loftiest of expectations, but that's a Power 4 non-conference game in other years. And now it's a routine Big Ten game. So for Penn State, they're going to play, I'm just going to rattle these off. They play Oregon, UCLA, Northwestern, Iowa, Ohio State, Indiana, Michigan State, Nebraska, Rutgers to finish the season. When I look at the schedule, you are playing the reigning national champion, and I get it, they're not the same team from a season ago. I think Penn State right now has the better roster than an Ohio State. Oregon was a team that was certainly a national title contender and ran into that Ohio State team that got hot in the postseason. But then when you add in that they're traveling to Kinnick, and we know that Penn State and Iowa, this has been, and we're going to talk about this in segment number 3, Penn State and Iowa, tight end U position, this is somehow created, Penn State and Iowa have somehow created a little bit of a back and forth rivalry. I get it, Penn State's unrivaled, all of that, all of the branding and what have you, but this series has been pretty close back and forth over the past almost a decade now. And with the debate that's going to happen in the final segment, you're going to understand a little more why. But going to Kinnick Stadium, going to Iowa is never easy. I imagine that could be a night game. Maybe. Fox might get a hold of it and make it a big noon kickoff. But if that's at night in the middle of October, that's not an ideal game for Penn State. Then you play Indiana. Indiana was a surprise team a season ago, and based on early Big Ten projections, they are one of the top 5 teams in the conference, including Oregon, including Ohio State, including Penn State, and Illinois. Penn State avoids Illinois and Michigan. I think those two teams, I think Illinois is certainly actually a conference title contender. Yes, the Illinois Fighting Illini, they have some of the most production returning in the entire country. So then you add in at Michigan State. And I think Michigan State can take a step forward under second-year head coach Jonathan Smith. Nebraska with Matt Rule, Dylan Raiola. Fortunately for Penn State, that one's at home, but Nebraska's not going to be easy. So it's understandable when you might scoff at the non-conference schedule. A game like Northwestern, that one's at UCLA. They got to travel cross country after they get finished playing the Oregon Ducks to start the season. But this is not an easy schedule. This is a challenging schedule. Is it the most difficult in the entire college football slate? Absolutely not. I think also something that benefits Penn State, they get a bye week in between. So after the Villanova game and before Oregon, that is a massive break. And then after Iowa and before that road game, and I forgot to mention, that one's at Ohio State as well. But Penn State gets strategic bye weeks between Iowa and Ohio State and between Villanova and Oregon. So the biggest games of the season, potentially, you get a bye week. You get an extra week to prepare. So that's a benefit for Penn State. But it's fitting because you are going to face two of potential. These might be two top 5 teams, top 3 teams at the end of when the season's all wrapped up. Who knows? Oregon and Ohio State might be 2 top 3 teams when Penn State's finished with its schedule. So we'll see how Penn State goes to navigate it. Of course, I think, like I said, Penn State, I think, is positioned well. There are some things that they can fix, defensive tackle being one of them. But this is a schedule that they certainly can go through. And if they go 10-2, 11-1, they're in the college football playoff. 12-0, that's going to be difficult. Not a lot of teams are going to go undefeated every single season anymore because of conference expansion. Is it possible? Sure. Is it likely? I can't say that it is when you have some of these teams on the schedule. But we'll see if Penn State's able to break that big game stigma. Because apparently against Boise State and against SMU, actual playoff games, it wasn't enough. Okay, fine. Because they came up short against Notre Dame, since that was classified as a big game. I think when you're able to go on the road and win games that you normally don't routinely, USC, Wisconsin, Minnesota, I get those caliber of opponents were lower than Penn State. They were in a different tier, but routinely Penn State doesn't win those games, and they found a way to win them. In the years past, they would lose those ones. They didn't this time around. So I think Penn State is in a different level. Now, can they beat the elite of the elite? No, because they weren't as good as them. But I think this Penn State team is better and better suited going into this season. Just gotta fix a couple of weak links on the football roster. So we'll see how they address them, like I said. Iowa, tight end you, right? Penn State has an argument, and I'm going to explain what it is coming up here after the break. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. And there's no better place to get in on that action than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss opening tip-off, or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. Using FanDuel's live betting feature is great because it will keep every moment of the game exciting. Whether you're backing your favorite team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, you'll never feel like you missed a chance. Plus, the app is super easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. It's no surprise that Iowa fans do not like it when you say anybody else but Iowa is tight end university. But to think that the Hawkeyes are by and far the best school at producing tight ends is not true. Penn State absolutely has a case here, and it's because college production needs to matter. When I look at Iowa tight end production versus Penn State tight end production, it's not even close. Tyler Warren just placed 7th in Heisman voting as a tight end. His final season at Penn State was better than each of George Kittle's and Noah Fant's entire careers at Iowa. Penn State has now produced Tyler Warren, Theo Johnson, Brenton Strange, Pat Freiermuth, Mike Gesicki, back to back over the past decade. We're talking about the past decade here. Tyler Warren is projected to potentially be a top 10, top 15 pick in the first round. Theo Johnson was a 4th round draft pick. Brenton Strange, Pat Freiermuth, and Mike Gesicki, all 2nd round NFL draft picks. Now, Iowa, their claim to fame. George Kittle, 5th round pick. Noah Fant, TJ Hawkinson, both 1st round picks. Sam Laporta, 2nd round pick. I don't really consider Eric All. Iowa fans want to take credit for Eric All. I guess he finished his career at Iowa. He happened to be drafted, I think it was the 4th round by the Cincinnati Bengals, but All didn't play. Now, I know it had to do with injury, but he didn't play a full season with Iowa, and he played most of his career at Michigan. But okay, Iowa's still a tight end factory that takes responsibility for Eric All. Let me talk about Position U and the Position U title itself. It can change. I don't care if Dartmouth was a quarterback factory in 1910. The schools can be really good at producing a position group for a long time and then fall off. Okay, so Penn State has now entered into this conversation because of the recent stretch that they've had since James Franklin has taken over. All of these tight ends are under James Franklin's tenure over the past decade, relatively the past decade, since give or take 2015. Well, yeah, it's been a decade. 2015 was 10 years ago, actually. So starting with Mike Gesicki and the production that he had in college, then Pat Freiermuth. Now he went through the COVID season and everything, but still had some really good production in college. Same thing with Brenton Strange, Theo Johnson, and now Tyler Warren just put together a Heisman campaign, one of the best football seasons by a tight end in college history. The only receiver that's even relatively close to that, Sam Laporta, gave a lot of production. It wasn't in the form of touchdowns, but he certainly had a good amount of receiving yards and receptions. I would say TJ Hawkinson had a pretty solid statistical college career and then was drafted highly in the NFL. But you have to consider a lot of different things. I didn't know that Iowa was in any way responsible for how the 49ers use George Kittle or the Lions use Sam Laporta in their offenses. They're in the NFL. How can Iowa take any credit for that? Now, I think that should be considered when you were talking about who is quarterback you, who is running back you, tight end you, for the sake of this conversation. NFL production matters, but it's not the only thing that matters. Development matters. Iowa's certainly doing that. Tyler Warren was a former quarterback turned tight end and a low 3-star prospect that became a Heisman candidate at tight end, may I mind you, and Penn State helped him develop into a potential top 15, top 10 overall pick in this year's NFL draft. George Kittle was a 2-star wide receiver, and now he's an all-pro NFL tight end. Noah Fant, same thing. TJ Hawkinson, Sam Laporta, those were all 3 stars, okay? They were kind of in the category of Tyler Warren. And I'll give Iowa credit where they had not 1 but 2 tight ends selected in the 1st round between Hawkinson and Fant. I don't think that accolade, that milestone is ever going to be reached again. We'll see. Penn State's going to run a lot of I don't think it's going to happen this time around. But Andrew Rapplier and Luke Reynolds are going to be really good in a year's time. Besides the point there, development, college production, where they were drafted, and NFL production. Just because George Kittle is really good with the San Francisco 49ers doesn't mean that Iowa is automatically tight end U. There are other factors that need to be considered in this conversation. So it is close. And I say Penn State is tight end U presently over Iowa because of the actual impact that Penn State tight ends have at Penn State. It goes back to one of my original points. Tyler Warren had a better senior season, a better final season than George Kittle and Noah Fant's careers at Iowa. College production matters. And Penn State not only was able to get the most out of Tyler Warren, but now he's going off to the NFL and he's going to be an early 1st round draft pick. And hopefully he has a strong, prosperous, and stable career. And for the record, Notre Dame isn't even close in this conversation based on the past decade. If you want to go back further, Notre Dame historically has had the most tight ends drafted. But again, I am not concerned about players that did well at Notre Dame in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. I didn't include any Penn State tight ends beyond 2015. If we're talking about the past decade, Penn State, I think, is tight end U over Iowa when you combine all of those factors together. If you're simply looking at NFL production and NFL accolades, fine. But when you consider everything, development, actual production, and how they actually played, and what stats they put up at their school when they were at their school, that's a huge component of it that for some reason people just overlook. So give me Penn State for tight end U, but it's very close, and I think it's just Penn State and Iowa. I don't think there are any other schools right now that continue to get the most production out of their tight ends when they are presently at their school, and then develop them and have them set up to a nice start for their NFL careers. It's really just Penn State and Iowa. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Be a part of the debate as we're going to wrap up this one for Locked On Nittany Lions. Again, be in the comments section. Let me know your thoughts about anything Penn State's defensive tackles. If you think there's another concerning position group, what you think about Penn State's 2025 schedule and Penn State versus Iowa in the tight end U debate. If you are new to the show, subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every single day. Thanks so much for checking out this episode. And for more conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams, including Penn State football, Penn State wrestling, Penn State men's basketball, keep it right here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And again, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. For your second listen and watch, it's March. The madness is here. For your second listen and watch, you got to check out Locked On College Basketball with Isaac Shade and Andy Patton. Become the most informed college basketball fan now. You can find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day.